Every group has a beginning and an end, but what happens in between? Will the group have a healthy progression or fizzle out along the way? And what exactly is a healthy ending to a group? Now, if you've been part of groups ministry for any period of time, you probably know what I'm talking about because groups ministry is not always linear. Groups are a lot more of an art than a science. And so the stages that we're going to talk about in this video, the stages that you face in groups along the way, are ones that most of us experience at some point. Naming those stages as you go along together in the group can help you map out the journey towards growth and transformation. But a map is only helpful if you know where you are and where you need to go. What's the destination? So I want to introduce you in this video to the life cycles as defined in mine and Justin Elefross's book, Groups, The Art of Leading Community. The life cycles were born out of an experience that both of us had as groups pastors over the last 20 years, sitting with groups and group leaders. One couple in particular that we remember had been leading for a few years, and for all intents and purposes, they were an extremely healthy group. They loved each other deeply. They served those in their community. They'd grown immensely through the years in their relationship with the Lord. The leaders were feeling that it was time to step away from leadership as they were just entering into a different season in life with their family. So they went to their group to see if anyone else was willing to lead. Crickets. No one would step up. And as I listened to them tell their story, both Justin and I just sat there confused. Now wait, so you're telling us that no one wants the group to end? Everyone sees it as a crucial part of their life, but no one's willing to step up and lead for a season? And they're like, yeah, you got that exactly right. Now, in that moment, it dawned on both of us that I think we failed as leaders, and I think that this group just fizzled out. But why? Now, in our experience, the most spiritual growth occurs in the first 18 months of a group. After those 18 months, it tends to slowly curtail away from growth. Why is that? We tend to grow in our relationship with the Lord when we take a step of faith and share vulnerable aspects of our story, confess present sins for the first time, or we're just forced out of our comfort zone altogether. And that can be a part of the gift of a group. The people in your group are a partial inheritance from the Lord to you right now. Conflict done well together actually creates the kind of intimacy that makes a healthy small group. But over time, that feeling of intimacy could turn into complacency within the group. Maybe this old analogy is helpful. Think about a stagnant pool. Stagnant pool doesn't breed life, it breeds death. Fresh water in and out allows the pool to dispose of bacteria that plagues the water from being useful. And in the same way, multiplication has got to be the natural overflow of Christian discipleship in a group. Gospel in, gospel out. If a group's been together with no change for longer than 18 to 36 months, we would see that as a red flag. Something needs to move in or out of the group. Now, good leaders and group members are able to recognize that these changes are necessary throughout the life cycle of each of their groups. Certain stages, as we're going to introduce throughout this video, may be more life-giving to some because it corresponds with their gift set or just maybe their personality. So for instance, we're going to talk through stage 1 and stage 4. Those are very different stages than stages 2 or 3. That's okay. The recognition is that you are leading in a space that doesn't come naturally. And that may help you name some of the frustrations you're feeling about your group in the moment, either as a member or a leader. Some of us can burn out because we won't define that this seems to be the season that God has for our group. This video is to help each of you as group leaders and members define those stages and see what God might be doing in your group. So we're hopeful that this is helpful to you both as group members and leaders in stepping into what God may have for you in your group. Let's get started with stage 1. Stage 1 of a group is marked by inclusion. As a group initially comes together, the members are looking to the leader, for the most part, to identify what is acceptable behavior and what to expect from the group each time. At this point, group members tend to be more dependent on the leader. Many times the leader can make the mistake of maybe being too passive or too domineering of the group. Now, if a leader is too dominant, we run the risk of keeping members at arm's length, and it might be difficult for those group members to engage in the group or have a sense of ownership of the group. However, if as a leader I'm too passive, the group tends to take on a life of its own. And this is when the group can have confusion about why it even exists. If everyone is able to make their own group, it won't necessarily have the cohesion to establish healthy rhythms of a group. Most of us are not ready to share our deepest, darkest secrets the first night of group. And it's the leader's role to provide a safe place for that journey to begin sharing. We are setting the stage for trust to be built. Naturally, members of a group will test the waters, sometimes with small things, to see how they're handled, so that they can maybe learn to trust with big things. Or as another author put it, relational trust is like a temperature gauge. It builds like that, but it's often lost like a light switch. In his book, The Speed of Trust, Stephen Covey says that trust is built when you're able to say about someone else, you are who you say you are, and you'll do what you say you'll do. This is true of your group leadership too, and you being a member of the group. That helps establish trust for everyone. What is the group going to be about? What's the rhythm going to be? What's the purpose of the group? Remember that all of us as group members are dependent on the leader to set the tone at this stage. This is where simple tasks done with excellence can go a long way in helping the group move through stage one. If you say you're going to send a follow-up email to the group, send the email. If you say you're going to send out a calendar for the next 6 months, do it. It's hard to overstate the importance of just these small things carried through that establish trust. And without it, often the group journey can end before it begins. A lot of us as leaders of groups sometimes don't recognize the significance of meeting together consistently and how it relates to building trust. Here's a practical example. Let's say your group has been together for a few months now. It starts out with a lot of energy and excitement, most do. Things really seem to be coming together. Then everyone, and most of us have experienced this, 7 p.m. on Tuesday night rolls around. It's time for group, and the texts start coming through. We can't make it tonight. One of the kids is sick. I can't make it tonight because I'm out of town for work and my husband won't make it either. And on the text thread builds, right? You ever been there? Now, many times, these are legitimate reasons. The emphasis I want to put here is not on the reasons, but on our response as leaders and also as members of the group. Remember, members of the group are looking to the leader to see what is acceptable behavior and what to expect. How will you respond to that text thread? The mistake we see many leaders make is they just cancel the group that week because only a few people can make it. I think that's a huge mistake. The group loses momentum because by canceling the group every time, people inadvertently communicate to the group that, it's not a big deal if we miss, we'll just cancel. You send that message back to them by immediately canceling. If consistency breeds trust, then hold the line. Be consistent, even if just 2 people show up. This is still the family of God coming together to share life together. Or as Jesus said, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. Even a smaller expression of your group becomes an invitation to those who had to miss for whatever reason. Certainly, there are weeks that need to be canceled for all sorts of reasons. I get it, life happens. But by holding the line and doing everything you can to meet together consistently, you are communicating that you can't have community without commitment. Leaders in stage 1 are casting the vision for what their group is going to be about from the second they receive the roster of people who are going to be joining, and they start communicating the plan, the why, the what, the where, all of it. Now, this is where pastors can help group leaders and members by having clear on-ramps into groups, communication about groups, and sharing the church's discipleship pathway. Seeing the on-ramp for group life through the lens of getting more involved and belonging to the church through spiritual formation helps everybody with the expectations. In this first stage, it's very important for you as leaders and members of the group to make sure everyone understands why the group exists. A lot of us naturally skip over the why of group and just start with the question of what. We want the relationships immediately. That's natural, I get it, but it doesn't make it right. The why acts as fuel to make the engine continue firing through the highs and lows of the coming months of what you're establishing in your group life. Now that's stage 1. We're inviting and including people. As the group begins to naturally transition to stage 2, this can come after months of sharing stories, creating predictability and reliability as a group. Members will have a better felt understanding of what the group will be about and how they can actually engage and be a part of what God's doing. To begin to move into that kind of experience in stage 2 of a group, which is what stage 2 is marked by, the entire group begins to experience the group together. This is where we begin to sense the group starting to gel, and the members are comfortable sharing ideas and opinions. The community buys in at stage 2. This is what we're looking forward to in stage 1. There's a shared ownership. That's a key as moving on into stage 2. You can begin to recognize it as your group grows more in stage 1. You'll know you're in stage 2 when you know your members well enough to pray for them meaningfully. And this is when the leader should begin to invite others to lead through the group and to maybe begin to give some of that leadership over. And we'll talk more about that in stage 2. As you enter out of stage 1 and begin to enter this, stage 2 of a group, you're going to find that it is marked largely by the entire group beginning to experience together. This is where you do sense the group starting to gel, and the community begins to buy in. This is what most people think of, stage 2, and when they think of a great small group, and I think that's a good thing. You'll know you're in stage 2 when you know members well enough to pray for one another. That's a key marker. That means that the community has begun to come together, people have started to share, and you're not trying to remember everyone's name necessarily anymore. You're more so remembering about how we pray for them, how you're interacting throughout the week. Now, back in stage 1, we talked about the importance of leaders avoiding being too dominant or passive. If you're too dominant, you're going to create a facade for others that feel like, stepping into a leadership role is too difficult for them. Stage 2 is where you want to start thinking through as a leader, hey, who could be another potential leader? They might look a little different from you. All of this was highlighted for me when I was sitting with potential leaders that we were asking to take over for their current group. The former leader was actually an elder of our church and really highly gifted. And as I sat with these group members, as they were in a great kind of stage 2 group and they were looking to start their own, they were hesitant. And they led with, we can't lead like Steve leads. And I responded by saying, that's really good news. We don't want you to be Steve or lead how Steve leads. We want you to lead your group to the glory of God, how he's wired you. And they were surprised that they could use their gifts of hospitality and mercy to lead the group. They didn't have to be world-class Bible teachers. Now, Steve never intended to create that kind of facade. He's just a highly gifted man. For those who are highly gifted, as leaders, we need to be aware in stage 2, looking for those leaders who are going to step out and potentially help lead the group when we're gone, invite them in to do that, and also give them the freedom that God wants to use them and their gifts to help lead this group and potentially lead another group for us, because gifts are given for the building up of the body. We see that in Ephesians 4:2. That's something to begin looking for in stage 2 as the group has gotten to know each other. So as the group begins to come together, you're beginning to notice each other's giftings, personalities. You know each other well enough to pray for one another. The statement of stage 2, how you know you're in it as a group, is that people start talking about the group as, this is our group. There's an ownership there. There's an increased hospitality to one another. There's a mercy to one another. There's more invitation to pray for one another. This is kind of the good stuff of small groups, what most people tend to think of when we think of small groups, and that's a really good thing. Now, what's going to happen throughout stage 2 is that you're going to begin growing in some vulnerability together. At least you hope so. Instead of saying, I'm in group with them, you say, this is our group. We're in community with him. I'm a part of their life. And that's when you know you're beginning to move into stage 3 of your group. But before moving there, we need to consider that stage 2 is a natural place for many groups to stall out. Many don't know how or have had experiences with deep relationships before. Not like this. So sometimes under the weight of that, the group can split or get unhealthy. Sometimes it can move deeper. As leaders and members, just be aware that when you're in stage 2, it can be a really sweet time, but just be on the lookout for any fears that come up during this time. The jump to stage 3, where you integrate a lot of the spiritual depth and growth, can be scary, but remember, you're doing it together. That's a mark that you know, hey, I think we're nearing the end of stage 2 and getting near the beginning of stage 3 of what God's doing in our group. Stage 3 in the life of a group is marked by closeness, a deeper connection, and an increase of emotional safety within the group. Now, oftentimes groups are launched into this stage because they're in the aftermath of a conflict, a crisis, or a confession of sin. This could be a huge explosion that's clear to everybody, or something more subtle in that the group has just been growing closer over time. But what happens in stage 3 is the group's able to engage in a more mature, open dialogue about real life issues with an increased honesty and vulnerability. The group recognizes that as a unique experience they've got together. Though most would never want to go through some of the experiences that push a group together like that, they love the way it knits them together. Now, sometimes we've been asked how we can know if the group is in stage 3 or not, and our response is always that it's really just a matter of time as you're going along as a group, moving through stage 1, stage 2, because I know this about human existence. None of us is immune from our whole lives changing in an instant with a simple phone call. Suffering is unavoidable, and actually, we're told to expect it in the Christian life. It can be incredibly lonely without community, but it doesn't have to be if you've got a group. This is one of the beautiful aspects of group life, to be able to mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice, as it says in Romans 12. That's a good verse for stage 3 of a group. This season might be a time of recovery for the group. It might be a time of pressing in more. It might be a time of more prayer than Bible study. That's how you know you're in stage 3. It can be deep. Now, just like in stage 2, this is another time where things might stall out because the group isn't able to make the necessary trust to make it through whatever conflict or fire that you're going through together. Often this is where a group dissolves or splits. Just as likely, core group members sometimes emerge who are able to take the group to that deeper level. Be open to what God's doing here in stage 3. It's a very vulnerable stage in the life of a group. Another reason, and much more subtle in stage 3, it's like a foxhole experience. It's easy to become insular or cliquish as a group because you can go, no one else really understands what we all went through together. So the group might resist in stage 3 bringing in new members or ever transitioning to stage 4 because you view it as now something to protect. This is the start, really, of a long downward spiral toward the group losing its effectiveness in helping other members, inviting others in to grow in Jesus. A group that's healthy in stage 3, on the flip side, sees the forged community as something powerful to invite others into. That's when you know you're ready to begin transitioning into stage 4, as you begin working together to share what God has done in your life, even out of the brokenness or whatever God's been doing in the group. An example of this is Japanese kintsugi art. It's broken pieces that are knitted together with silver, gold, or platinum. And so what was broken actually becomes very beautiful and maybe even more valuable. Beauty from ashes. God is doing a new thing here. It's a new thing that in stage 3, if your group arrives in this place, is something to invite others into. And that leads you directly into stage 4 of your group life. A group in stage 4 is thinking about how they're going to execute the Great Commission. And a group in stage 4 is the natural overflow of the gospel together. This truly is the vision Jesus laid out in John 13, saying, "They'll know you're my disciples by how you love one another." But loving one another is not an end in and of itself. Remember, your group to be healthy is gospel in, gospel out. Everyone's using their spiritual gifts to build up the body. Everyone's jumping in and leading in some capacity by stage 4. In fact, if a visitor were to come to the group in stage 4, they might not be able to tell who the leader is because everybody is participating. This is where sometimes what we call missional communities are so important. This idea of a third place for your group. A group in stage 4 is great to begin to establish a third place because the life cycle of the group has come to a place where they can begin to invite those who don't follow Jesus into the gospel community that has been forged in their own group. And a third place, maybe a coffee spot, a restaurant, a playground, anything like that as a natural gathering point for the community is a place for your group to go and invite others in. The key is to be intentional in those spaces to exhibit the beauty of the gospel community God's given you together. Now, as mentioned, they'll know you're my disciples by how you love one another. Remember, the scriptures don't know a people of God who focus only on one another or just community or mission. It's all of it together. So the theme of stage 4 of your group is going to be the gospel together. He has forged our community through the kind of the wobbliness of stage 1, largely the sweetness of stage 2, some of the hard stuff. the prayers and the tears of stage 3, and now we're at a place where we want to say, this is really precious. We want to invite others into it. So that stage 4 is what happens to the group when all of that has happened, and you're saying, man, we've got something really good. We want to share it with others. It is one of the examples of the gospel taking hold of a group and inviting others in. That is really a sweet spot for a group, but it's not the end goal. We're going to talk more about that in stage 5. You want to help your group transition from stage 4 into a group with a legacy. So stage 5 is about ending the group. You see, your goal from the very beginning is not to be the same group for longer than 18 to 36 months. And so the end or the natural death of a group sometimes is exactly what needs to happen. Sometimes those groups actually become 3 groups. They'll multiply out. Now, there's a biblical idea for you. And as we've said, multiplication has got to be the natural overflow of gospel in, gospel out discipleship in your group. Now, if your group's never multiplied, that can be a marker that maybe you've stalled out in one of the previous stages. Every group has a beginning and an end on this life cycle. We have an opportunity as leaders and members to normalize that experience of a group ending here in stage 5. It's not a hard concept to understand, but most of us don't want the group to end because it's become familiar. Because we sometimes forget that we're not leading group for the sake of leading group. We lead groups because we believe God uses them to shape and mold us and others into Christ-likeness. If a group stops being useful for that purpose, it should end. It should multiply. Jesus said that if salt loses its saltiness, it's lost its usefulness. I would say if your group loses your saltiness, it's the same. After teaching this material, these life stages to group leaders and members at countless churches, I had a couple of coaches groups come up to me, and they say that they needed to end their group. And they tried to end the group a few months prior, but the members of the group wanted to continue to meet. And in some ways, that's really beautiful. Yet, in other ways, the group had lost its saltiness. That's okay. The end result of a group is either multiplication or death. Maybe that group needs to multiply out if they want to stay together. God used the group in some capacity, and he wants to do new work through it. A statement that summarizes this final stage and the ending of a group is that the end depends upon the beginning. All the way back at stage 1, are we preparing our groups that we will be together for a time to see what God has for us? Are you in on the adventure? And just know that the end result of this group is going to be that we multiply. And that might mean that this group in its current form ends, but we're going to experience new life, new groups, new leaders, new disciples through the groups that will be born because of the legacy of what God did in our time together. That's the group life cycle. That's the adventure that we're inviting you to come live and be a part of as a leader or a member in a group at our church.